The morning sun filtered through the blinds of a cozy little diner tucked away on the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee, pancakes sizzling on the griddle, and the tangy aroma of bacon. It was a place where locals came to start their day or take a break from life's hustle. The diner wasn't fancy. Its walls were painted a cheerful yellow and the vinyl booths had seen better days, but it had a charm that made people feel at home. For Sarah, this diner was more than just her workplace. It was her second home. Sarah moved briskly between tables, balancing trays laden with steaming mugs of coffee and plates piled high with eggs and toast. At 26, she had already learned how to juggle responsibilities with grace. Her shifts at the diner stretched long, but they weren't enough to cover all her bills. That's why she picked up extra hours cleaning offices late into the night. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah always greeted customers with a warm smile, remembering names and favorite orders. She believed in treating everyone kindly because she knew what it felt like to struggle. This particular Thursday morning started off slow. Only a handful of regulars occupied the tables, a truck driver nursing his third cup of black coffee, an elderly couple sharing a plate of waffles, and a young man typing furiously on his laptop while sipping orange juice. Outside, cars whizzed by on the highway, but inside, time seemed to move slower. The gentle hum of conversation blended with the clinking of silverware against plates, creating a soothing rhythm. Behind the counter, Sarah refilled salt shakers and wiped down sticky spots left behind by syrup spills. She glanced at the clock above the register. It was almost 9:30. Not too busy yet, she thought, allowing herself a brief moment to lean against the counter and stretch her legs. Her feet ached from standing for hours, and her back protested every movement, but she pushed those thoughts aside. Complaining wouldn't help anyone, least of all herself. As she straightened up, the bell above the door chimed softly, signaling a new arrival. Sarah turned automatically, ready to greet whoever walked in. A woman stepped through the doorway, looking slightly out of place among the usual crowd. She wore a simple cardigan over a faded blouse, and her shoes looked worn but clean. There was something about her posture, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes darting around nervously, that caught Sarah's attention. The woman hesitated near the entrance before choosing a booth by the window. She slid into the seat carefully, placing her purse on the table in front of her. Through the glass, sunlight illuminated her face, revealing lines etched deep by years of worry and sleepless nights. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the menu propped upright on the table. Something about her demeanor tugged at Sarah's heartstrings. Curious, Sarah grabbed a pot of coffee and made her way over. "Good morning," she said brightly, pouring a fresh cup without waiting for a response. "Can I get you anything else?" The woman looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to reply. Finally, she managed a small smile. "Just browsing for now, thank you." Sarah nodded, sensing the hesitation. "Take your time," she said gently. "Our specials are written on the board, behind the counter if you need any recommendations." She left the woman to her thoughts, returning to the counter to check on the other patrons. But something nagged at her. Maybe it was the way the woman clutched the menu so tightly, or the fact that she hadn't touched the coffee Sarah poured for her. Whatever it was, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. A few minutes later, she decided to circle back. When she approached the booth again, the woman still hadn't ordered. Instead, she stared blankly at the menu, her lips moving silently as though calculating numbers in her head. Sarah cleared her throat softly. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The woman blinked, startled once more. Then, after a pause, she sighed. I'm sorry. I think I might have overestimated how much I can afford today." Her voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with embarrassment. "Could you bring me something smaller, maybe just a side of toast?" Sarah's chest tightened. She'd been there herself, counting coins in her pocket, trying to figure out which bill to pay first. No one should ever feel ashamed for wanting a decent meal. Without missing a beat, she smiled reassuringly. "Of course," she said. "Let me see what we can do." Back at the counter, Sarah glanced toward the kitchen, weighing her options. She didn't have much wiggle room in her budget either, but she couldn't let this woman leave hungry. Making a quick decision, she slipped $20 from her tip jar and handed it to the cashier under the guise of covering the woman's order. To anyone watching, it would look like the money belonged to the customer. When she returned to the booth with a full breakfast plate, eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. "The eat you." Woman looked both surprised and grateful. "You didn't have to," she began, but Sarah cut her off. "It's no trouble at all," Sarah replied warmly. "Everyone deserves a good meal." For the first time since walking in, the woman relaxed. She thanked Sarah repeatedly, promising to repay her someday, though they both knew it was unlikely. As Sarah walked away, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Sometimes helping others, even in small ways, was the only thing that kept her going. Little did Sarah know, this act of kindness would set off a chain reaction that would change not only her life but also the lives of many others. The woman sitting alone in the booth by the window was named Margaret. She wasn't a regular at the diner, but she had passed it countless times over the years. It was one of those places that always seemed warm and inviting, even from the outside. Today, however, Margaret hadn't come for the food or the atmosphere. She had come because she needed a moment to herself, a quiet place where she could sit, think, and maybe find a little comfort. Margaret's life had been anything but easy. Her husband, James, had served in the military for over 20 years, before retiring with honors. He was a proud man, dedicated to his country and his family, but when he passed away 2 years ago after a sudden illness, everything changed. Not only did Margaret lose her partner, but she also found herself drowning in financial struggles. The pension James had worked so hard for disappeared due to complications with paperwork and legal red tape. Without it, Margaret had to rely on odd jobs and savings that dwindled faster than she ever imagined. Today, Margaret had decided to treat herself to breakfast. It wasn't something she did often. Eating out felt like an unnecessary luxury these days, but she thought a meal at the diner might lift her spirits. She had carefully counted out the cash in her wallet earlier that morning, trying to calculate what she could afford. A cup of coffee and a small plate of eggs seemed reasonable enough. But as she sat there now, staring at the menu, reality hit her hard. Even something as simple as eggs and toast felt too extravagant. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the laminated menu. Each item listed came with a price tag that made her stomach churn. Pancakes? Too much. Omelets? Out of the question. Even the side orders seemed beyond her reach. Margaret sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her chest. She glanced around the diner, wondering if anyone else could see the shame written all over her face. That's when Sarah approached again. Margaret recognized her immediately, the young waitress who had greeted her earlier with such genuine kindness. Sarah carried herself with confidence, though Margaret sensed there was more to her story than met the eye. There was a tiredness in her eyes, a weariness that hinted at long hours and hard work. Yet, despite whatever burdens she carried, Sarah smiled brightly as she leaned in to check on Margaret. "Have you decided yet?" Sarah asked, her tone light and friendly. Margaret hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to say yes, to pick something quickly and pretend everything was fine, but the truth bubbled up before she could stop it. I'm sorry," she stammered, looking down at her lap. "I think I may have misjudged how much I can spend today." Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying Margaret with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Oh, don't worry about that," she said softly. "We've got plenty of options. Let me help." Margaret nodded weakly, grateful for the reprieve. Together, they scanned the menu, trying to find something affordable. But even as they talked, Margaret could feel her cheeks growing hot with embarrassment. She hated being in this position, needing help, feeling like a burden. When Sarah suggested a simple order of toast and jam, Margaret forced a smile and agreed. Anything to end the awkwardness. As Sarah walked away to place the order, Margaret let out a shaky breath. She stared out the window, watching cars drive past on the highway. Memories of James flooded her mind. His laughter, his steady presence, the way he always took care of her. Now sitting here alone in this diner, she felt more vulnerable than ever. When Sarah returned a few minutes later, balancing a tray with a steaming plate of food, Margaret braced herself for the bill. But instead of handing her a check, Sarah set the plate down gently and slid into the seat across from her. "I hope this is okay," Sarah said, gesturing to the food. "It's not much, but it should tide you over." Margaret blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "Don't worry about paying for this. Consider it my treat." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "No, I couldn't possibly. It's already taken care of." Sarah interrupted gently. "Really, it's no trouble at all. Everyone deserves a good meal every now and then." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes, threatening to spill over. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she simply nodded, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. For the first time, in what felt like forever, someone had seen her struggle and offered help without judgment or hesitation. Over the next few minutes, Margaret ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food tasted better than she remembered, not just because she was hungry, but because it came with a side of humanity. As she chewed, she thought about Sarah, the young woman who had gone out of her way to make her feel valued. Margaret wondered what kind of person Sarah truly was. Was she always this generous? Did she realize how much her actions meant? By the time Margaret finished her meal, she felt lighter somehow, as though a tiny piece of the heaviness she'd been carrying had lifted. She reached into her purse to leave a tip, hoping to repay Sarah in some small way, but Sarah stopped her. "Please," she said firmly, "you don't owe me anything." Margaret stood up, clutching her purse tightly. Before leaving, she scribbled a quick note on a napkin and placed it on the table. Then, with a final nod of gratitude toward Sarah, she turned and walked out of the diner. Sarah didn't notice the napkin until later when she began clearing the table. Picking it up, she read the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me there is still good in this world." For a moment, Sarah froze, holding the napkin close to her chest. She had done what she thought was right, never expecting anything in return. But Margaret's note reminded her why acts of kindness mattered. They created ripples, spreading far beyond the initial gesture. Unbeknownst to either woman, those ripples were about to grow much larger. As Margaret stepped outside the diner, she noticed a group of soldiers walking toward the entrance. Their uniforms were crisp, their boots polished, and their faces full of camaraderie. Something stirred within Margaret, an idea forming in her mind. If Sarah's kindness could brighten her day, perhaps it could inspire others too. With newfound determination, Margaret approached the soldiers, eager to share the story of the waitress who had shown her compassion. And as the soldiers listened, intently nodding along, none of them realized how profoundly this chance encounter would impact everyone involved, including Sarah. As Margaret stepped outside the diner, she paused for a moment, letting the cool morning air wash over her. The weight of Sarah's kindness still lingered in her heart, warming her despite the chill. She glanced back at the diner where the faint glow of light spilled onto the sidewalk and felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, to honor the young waitress's selflessness. But what could she possibly do? She wasn't wealthy, didn't have connections, and certainly didn't have the resources to repay Sarah in any meaningful way. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of boots clicking against the pavement. A group of soldiers was approaching, their uniforms crisp and their postures upright. They laughed and joked among themselves, their camaraderie evident even from a distance. Margaret recognized them immediately. They were likely headed to the diner for breakfast just as she had been moments earlier. Something about their presence stirred her. These men and women represented everything James had loved about serving his country: duty, honor, and community. And suddenly, an idea began to form in her mind. Margaret took a deep breath and walked toward them, her steps slow but deliberate. As she drew closer, The soldiers noticed her and quieted down, their expressions shifting to polite curiosity. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, smiled warmly. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "can we help you?" Margaret hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. She hadn't planned this, it was all happening so quickly. But the sincerity in the soldier's voice gave her courage. I just wanted to tell you something," she said softly. "Something that happened inside that diner." The soldiers exchanged glances, intrigued. "Sure, ma'am," the bearded man replied. "We're listening." With a shaky breath, Margaret launched into the story of Sarah, the waitress who had noticed her struggle, slipped $20 out of her own pocket to cover her meal, and done it all without expecting anything in return. Margaret recounted every detail. The way Sarah had smiled reassuringly, the discreet way she had handled the situation, and the note she had left behind expressing gratitude. By the time she finished, her voice was trembling with emotion. The soldiers stood silently, absorbing her words. Some nodded thoughtfully, while others exchanged looks of admiration. Finally, the bearded man spoke. "That's quite a story," he said, his tone filled with respect. "Sounds like she's one of those people who reminds us there's still good in the world." Margaret nodded fervently. "Exactly," she said. "And I think we should do something for her. Something to show her that kindness doesn't go unnoticed." The idea hung in the air for a moment, sparking a flurry of whispered conversations among the group. One soldier suggested leaving a generous tip, while another proposed buying her lunch. But then the bearded man raised a hand, silencing the chatter. "Let's not just leave a tip," he said firmly. "Let's do something bigger, something that'll really make an impact." The others agreed, their enthusiasm growing as they brainstormed ideas. They decided to pool their money together, not just for Sarah, but also to help others like her. After all, they reasoned, if one person's act of kindness could inspire such gratitude, imagine what a collective effort might achieve. With a plan forming in their minds, the soldiers thanked Margaret for sharing her story and headed into the diner, their spirits high and their wallets ready. Inside, Sarah was busy refilling coffee cups and jotting down orders. She didn't notice the soldiers until they filed in, filling the largest booth near the window. Their arrival brought a buzz of energy to the otherwise quiet diner. Customers glanced up from their meals, some nodding respectfully or offering quiet thanks for their service. Sarah greeted them warmly, sliding menus across the table and asking if they wanted anything to drink. "Coffee, please," the bearded man said with a grin, "and maybe a little time to figure out what we're ordering." Sarah chuckled. "Take your time," she said. "I'll be back in a bit to check on you." As she moved away, the soldiers leaned in close, finalizing their plan. Each of them pulled out cash, stacking bills on the table until they had a respectable amount. Then they waited, chatting casually and pretending to deliberate over the menu. When Sarah returned a few minutes later, they flagged her down. "We're ready to order," the bearded man announced, handing her a folded piece of paper along with their choices. Confused, Sarah unfolded it as she scribbled down their requests. Her eyes widened when she realized it wasn't just an order, it was money. A lot of it. "What's this?" she asked, staring at the pile of bills in her hand. "It's for you," the bearded man explained simply. "For what you did for that lady earlier. We heard about it, and we wanted to say thank you." Sarah froze, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "Wait, you heard about that?" she stammered. The soldiers nodded, smiling. "Yeah, we ran into her outside," one of them chimed in. "She told us everything. What you did, it meant a lot to her, and it means a lot to us too." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked around the table. These strangers, these brave men and women who served their country, were thanking her. It didn't make sense. She was just doing her job, or at least that's what she kept telling herself. But the soldiers saw something more in her actions. They saw kindness, compassion, humanity. I don't know what to say," Sarah admitted, her voice cracking. "This is incredible. Thank you so much." The bearded man shrugged modestly. Don't mention it. You reminded us why it's important to look out for each other. Now it's our turn to pay it forward." Sarah hugged each of them tightly, overwhelmed by their generosity. As she returned to the counter to process their order, she couldn't stop smiling. The diner seemed brighter somehow, as though the walls themselves were glowing with warmth. Even the customers who witnessed the exchange couldn't help but smile, struck by the ripple effect of one small act of kindness. Meanwhile, the soldiers settled into their meal, laughing and joking as they always did. But there was a new sense of purpose in their voices. They had started the day planning to grab a quick bite, but now they were part of something bigger. Their decision to honor. Sarah's gesture had turned an ordinary morning into something extraordinary, and the best part was it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Word of what happened spread quickly through the diner. By the time the soldiers finished their meal and prepared to leave, the entire staff and several customers had gathered to thank them. The bearded man shook hands with everyone, promising that this wouldn't be the last time they paid it forward. As the group walked out the door, they carried with them not only full stomachs, but also a renewed commitment to making the world a better place. One act of kindness at a time. Back inside, Sarah stared at the stack of cash in disbelief. It was more than enough to cover her bills for the month, maybe even longer. But as grateful as she was, she knew the real gift wasn't the money. It was the reminder that even in tough times, people could come together to lift each other up. And sometimes all it took was one small act of kindness to start a chain reaction that changed lives, including her own. The bell above the diner door jingled again, and a group of soldiers walked in, their boots clicking rhythmically against the tiled floor. The sudden influx of energy was palpable, as if the entire room had taken a collective breath. They were a mix of men and women, all wearing crisp uniforms that spoke of discipline and pride. Their badges gleamed under the soft overhead lights, and their faces carried a sense of camaraderie that only those who served together could truly understand. Sarah glanced up from the counter where she'd been organizing napkins and silverware. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of them. She recognized some of the faces. They were regulars, locals stationed at nearby Fort Bragg or veterans passing through town. Others, however, were unfamiliar, likely visitors on leave or part of a temporary deployment in the area. Regardless, they brought with them an air of respectability and gratitude that always made Sarah stand a little taller when serving them. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully, grabbing a handful of menus. "Welcome to Joe's Diner. Right this way." The soldiers nodded politely, murmuring greetings as they followed her to one of the larger booths near the window. It was the best spot in the house, brightened by natural light during the day and offering a perfect view of the highway outside. As they settled in, laughing and chatting among themselves, Sarah couldn't help but smile. There was something comforting about their presence, a reminder that even in chaotic times, there were still people willing to put others first. Once everyone was seated, Sarah handed out menus and took drink orders. Coffee was the unanimous choice, with a few requests for orange juice and water. She moved efficiently between the tables, pouring cups and jotting down notes, her movements fluid and practiced. Despite the bustle, she kept one ear tuned to the soldiers' conversation. They talked about everything, from upcoming training, exercises to weekend plans, and their laughter echoed warmly throughout the diner. As Sarah refilled a coffee cup at a neighboring table, she overheard snippets of their discussion. One soldier mentioned having just returned from overseas, while another joked about missing his dog more than anything else. A young woman in the group chimed in, teasing him about how he probably missed pizza delivery more than his pet. The banter was lighthearted, yet beneath it lay an unspoken bond, a shared understanding of sacrifice and duty that outsiders rarely grasped. Back at the soldiers' booth, Sarah checked in periodically, asking if they needed anything else. Each time they greeted her with smiles and polite nods, their manners impeccable. But what struck Sarah most was the way they interacted with the other patrons. Several customers stopped by their table to shake hands or offer quiet thanks for their service. Some even insisted on picking up part of their bill, though the soldiers declined graciously, citing their policy of not accepting free meals unless absolutely necessary. It was clear that these men and women weren't just here for breakfast. They were ambassadors of hope and unity. Their mere presence reminded everyone in the diner of the values they stood for: courage, loyalty, and selflessness. And today, unbeknownst to anyone except Margaret, they carried an additional mission. One, inspired by Sarah's earlier act of kindness. While Sarah worked, she noticed subtle signs of planning among the group. Notes were passed discreetly under the table, and hushed conversations broke out whenever she stepped away. At first, she thought nothing of it. Soldiers often coordinated logistics or discussed strategies during downtime, but something about their behavior felt different. They seemed unusually focused, almost secretive, as if plotting something important. Curiosity tugged at Sarah, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself to stay professional. After all, she had tables to tend to and orders to fulfill. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something special was unfolding right under her nose. Meanwhile, the soldiers finalized their plan. The bearded man, the unofficial leader of the group, quietly counted the cash they had pooled together, ensuring it was enough to make a meaningful impact. His comrades watched intently, their expressions a mix of excitement and determination. When he nodded in satisfaction, the tension in the air dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. "All right," the bearded man whispered, leaning in so only the group could hear. "Here's how we'll do it. We'll wait until she comes, back with our drinks, then hand her the money. Keep it simple, no fanfare. Just let her know why we're doing this." The others agreed, nodding firmly. None of them wanted to draw unnecessary attention to themselves. This wasn't about recognition. It was about honoring Sarah's generosity and proving that good deeds never go unnoticed. When Sarah returned with their coffee and juice, she set the tray down carefully, distributing the cups around the table. "Here you go," she said brightly. "Let me know if you need anything else." The bearded man caught her eye and smiled. "Actually," he began, reaching into his pocket, "there is something." He pulled out a folded stack of bills and placed it on the table beside the check pad. "This is for you." Sarah froze, her pen hovering midair. "For me?" she repeated, confusion etched across her face. "Yes," the soldier confirmed, his voice steady and sincere. "We heard about what you did for that lady earlier, the one who came in before us. We wanted to show our appreciation." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How had they found out? Had Margaret told them? She glanced around the diner, half expecting to see the widow lingering somewhere, but Margaret was long gone. Instead, all she saw were the soldiers, their faces earnest and kind. I don't know what to say," Sarah stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's incredibly generous of you," the bearded man shrugged modestly. "We're just following your example," he said. "You reminded us that it doesn't take much to make someone's day better. Now it's our turn to pay it forward." Sarah hugged each of them tightly, overwhelmed by their gesture. She tried to protest, insisting they didn't have to do this, but they wouldn't hear it. This wasn't charity. It was gratitude, plain and simple. By the time she returned to the counter, clutching the money, her cheeks hurt from smiling so much. The ripple effect of kindness continued to spread throughout the diner. Customers noticed the exchange and began whispering among themselves, marveling at the soldiers' generosity. Some even approached Sarah to add their own contributions, slipping bills into her tip jar or quietly paying for portions of the soldiers' meal. The atmosphere grew warmer, more connected, as strangers bonded over a shared belief in the power of compassion. By the time the soldiers finished eating and prepared to leave, the entire diner had transformed. What had started as an ordinary morning had become a celebration of humanity, a testament to the fact that even in difficult times, people could come together to create moments of beauty and grace. As the soldiers filed out, shaking hands and exchanging hugs with patrons and staff alike, Sarah stood by the door watching them go. She knew this moment would stay with her forever, not because of the money, but because of the lesson it reinforced. Kindness wasn't just an action, it was a catalyst, capable of sparking change far beyond its initial scope. And sometimes all it took was one small act to remind the world that goodness still existed. The soldier's departure left behind a diner buzzing with energy, the kind that lingers after something extraordinary happens. Customers who had been quietly sipping their coffee or nibbling on toast suddenly found themselves talking animatedly about what they'd just witnessed. The air was thick with admiration and awe, not just for Sarah but also for the soldiers whose generosity had turned an ordinary Thursday morning into something unforgettable. Sarah stood near the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the stack of bills the soldiers had given her. It wasn't just the amount, it was far more than she made in a week that overwhelmed her. It was the weight of what it represented. These men and women, many of whom had sacrificed so much already, had chosen to give back. They hadn't done it for recognition or praise. They'd done it because they believed in paying kindness forward, and somehow Sarah, a waitress working 2 jobs to make ends meet, had inspired them. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the morning. From Margaret's quiet struggle at the booth to the soldier's unexpected gesture, everything felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this moment wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone involved, the widow who had shared her story, the soldiers who had acted on it, and even the customers who had added their own contributions to the growing wave of goodwill. This wasn't just her story anymore. It had grown bigger than any one person. As Sarah moved through the diner, clearing plates and refilling drinks, she noticed how the mood had shifted. People were smiling more, chatting with strangers and leaving larger-than-usual tips. One elderly couple debated splitting the bill for their pancakes, ultimately deciding to cover part of another table's order. A truck driver, who rarely spoke, beyond placing his usual coffee order, handed Sarah a $20 bill, muttering, "For your jar." When she tried to protest, he simply waved her off. "Keep it going," he said gruffly, though his eyes twinkled with warmth. Even Joe, the diner's gruff but lovable owner, seemed affected. He emerged from the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel, his brow furrowed as if trying to process what had happened. Joe wasn't one for sentimentality. He ran the diner with military precision, ensuring every plate was served promptly and every customer left satisfied. But even he couldn't deny the significance of the morning's events. After watching, Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks while hugging the soldiers goodbye. Joe approached her with an uncharacteristic softness in his voice. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his tone gruff but gentle. Sarah nodded, still clutching the money. "Yeah, I'm fine, just overwhelmed." Joe studied her for a moment before nodding toward the cash in her hand. "What are you gonna do with all that?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. Part of her wanted to use it to pay off some bills, maybe catch up on rent or buy groceries without worrying about the cost. But another part of her, a louder, more insistent part, knew she couldn't keep it all for herself. Not after seeing how kindness had spread throughout the diner in such a short time. If she hoarded the money, wouldn't that defeat the purpose? Wouldn't it undo the lesson she'd just learned? "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted finally, "but I think I want to share it. Maybe help someone else who needs it." Joe raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You sure? That's a lot of cash." "Yeah, I'm sure," Sarah replied firmly. "It doesn't feel right keeping it all. Besides, look what happened today. One small thing led to all of this. Imagine what could happen if we kept it going." Joe didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the diner, taking in the lively chatter and the lingering smiles. For once, the usually stoic man seemed lost in thought. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right then," he said gruffly. "But let me know if you need anything. You hear me?" Sarah smiled, touched by his rare display of vulnerability. "Thanks, Joe. I will." Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush began to wind down, Sarah decided to act on her impulse. She pulled out her phone and opened a social media app, something she rarely used outside of staying in touch with family. With shaking fingers, she typed out a post describing the morning's events. Margaret's struggle, her decision to help, the soldiers' incredible response. and the ripple effect that followed. She included photos of the diner, careful not to show anyone's face, and ended the post with a simple message. Kindness doesn't have to be big or flashy. Sometimes it's just paying for someone's meal or leaving a generous tip. Today, I saw how one small act can inspire others to do the same. Let's keep this chain going. If you're able, consider helping someone in need. Every little bit counts. She hesitated before hitting post, nervous about sharing such a personal story. But deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. Within minutes, the post gained traction. Likes poured in, followed by comments from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. Some shared their own stories of kindness received or given, while others pledged to perform random acts of generosity in honor of Sarah's example. By evening, the post had gone viral, reaching thousands of people across the country. Word of the diner's heartwarming morning spread quickly. Local news outlets picked up the story, sending reporters to interview Sarah, Joe, and several customers who had witnessed the events firsthand. Margaret heard about it too, tuning into a segment that aired during the evening news. Seeing Sarah's face on television glowing with gratitude and humility brought fresh tears to her eyes. She realized then that her decision to tell the soldiers about Sarah's kindness had sparked something far greater than she ever imagined. Meanwhile, the diner became a hub of activity. People came from neighboring towns to eat there, eager to experience the place where such a remarkable chain reaction had begun. Strangers stopped by to thank Sarah personally, slipping donations into her tip jar or offering words of encouragement. One woman handed her a handwritten note that read, "Your kindness reminded me that the world is still full of good people. Thank you for being one of them." Inspired by the outpouring of support, Sarah decided to formalize her efforts. With Joe's blessing, she set up a donation box near the register, encouraging patrons to contribute whatever they could. The proceeds would go toward helping local families struggling financially. People like Margaret, who often fell through the cracks despite their best efforts. Within days, the box overflowed with cash and checks, along with notes of gratitude and solidarity. As the days turned into weeks, the impact continued to grow. A crowdfunding campaign launched by a local journalist raised over $50,000 in less than a month, enough to ease Sarah's financial burden significantly. Donors from across the country contributed, inspired by her selflessness and the domino effect it created. Veterans organizations reached out to Margaret, offering assistance. With her legal issues and connecting her with resources she hadn't known existed, even the soldiers who had started it all stayed in touch, checking in regularly to see how Sarah and Margaret were doing. Through it all, Sarah remained humble, deflecting praise whenever possible. "I didn't do anything special," she insisted, repeatedly. "I just did what anyone else would have done." But those who knew her understood differently. Her actions may have seemed small in the grand scheme of things, but they carried immense weight. In a world often overshadowed by negativity, Sarah's simple act of kindness served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that compassion has the power to unite us, uplift us, and transform lives in ways we might never expect. And so the diner became more than just a place to grab a meal. It became a symbol of community, resilience, and the enduring belief that even in tough times people can come together to create something beautiful. For Sarah, Margaret, the soldiers, and everyone else touched by the events of that fateful morning, the lesson was clear. Kindness isn't just an action, it's a legacy. And sometimes all it takes is one person to start the chain. The diner, once a quiet corner of the town known only to locals, had transformed into something extraordinary. It was no longer just a place where people stopped for pancakes or coffee. It had become a symbol of hope and connection. The story of Sarah's kindness, Margaret's gratitude, and the soldiers' generosity spread far beyond the small community, touching hearts across the country. What started as a single act of compassion had grown into a movement, a testament to how one person's actions could inspire countless others. As weeks turned into months, the diner became busier than ever. People traveled from neighboring towns and even other states to visit the spot where such a remarkable chain reaction began. Some came to thank Sarah personally, slipping donations into her tip jar or leaving heartfelt notes on napkins. Others simply wanted to soak in the atmosphere, imagining the moment when kindness had sparked something so profound. Every day brought new stories of inspiration, each one adding another layer to the diner's legacy. Sarah herself was overwhelmed by the attention, but handled it with grace. She continued working her shifts, serving customers with the same warmth and care that had always defined her. Yet, she couldn't help but notice how much had changed, not just in her life, but in the lives of those around her. The crowdfunding campaign had raised enough money to alleviate her financial struggles, allowing her to focus on her passion for helping others without constantly worrying about making ends meet. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of stability and freedom. But Sarah didn't stop there. Inspired by the outpouring of support, she decided to use her platform to do more. With Joe's blessing, she organized monthly kindness nights at the diner, inviting local charities and nonprofit organizations to set up booths and share their missions with patrons. On these nights, a portion of the diner's proceeds went directly to causes like food banks, veteran support programs, and housing assistance initiatives. Customers embraced the idea wholeheartedly, packing the diner to capacity and contributing generously. These events not only strengthened the community, but also reinforced the belief that everyone has the power to make a difference. Margaret, too, experienced a transformation. The legal complications surrounding her late husband's pension were finally resolved, thanks in large part to the veterans organizations that had stepped in after hearing her story. They provided her with resources, guidance, and emotional support, helping her navigate the complex paperwork and advocate for her rights. For the first time since James's passing, Margaret felt a renewed sense of security and purpose. She began volunteering at a local veteran outreach center, sharing her journey and encouraging other widows and families to seek help when needed. Her resilience inspired many, proving that even in the face of loss, there is always room for healing and growth. The soldiers who had played such a pivotal role in the story remained connected to Sarah and Margaret, forming an unbreakable bond. They visited the diner regularly, bringing friends and fellow service members along to experience its unique charm. Their presence reminded everyone of the importance of gratitude, not just for those who serve in uniform, but for anyone who chooses to live with kindness and integrity. One soldier, the bearded man who had led the group's gesture, even proposed turning their efforts into a formal initiative called Pay It Forward Patriots. The program aimed to recognize everyday acts of kindness and amplify them through collective action, ensuring that the spirit of generosity continued to thrive. Word of the diner's impact reached national media outlets, leading to features on morning talk shows and interviews with Sarah, Margaret, and several of the soldiers. Each retelling of the story reignited conversations about the power of compassion and the importance of looking out for one another. Viewers flooded social media with messages of gratitude, pledging to perform their own acts of kindness in honor of the diner's example. Hashtags like Chan Kindness Chain and Chan Paying It Forward trended online, sparking challenges and campaigns that encouraged people to document their good deeds and inspire others to join in. Back at the diner, life settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and extraordinary. Joe, the gruff but lovable owner, found himself embracing the changes with surprising enthusiasm. He introduced a random acts of kindness board, where customers could pin notes about moments of goodwill they'd witnessed or experienced. The board quickly filled up with colorful cards, each one telling a story of connection and care. Joe also launched a scholarship fund for local students pursuing careers in public service, funded entirely by donations from the diner's patrons. It was his way of giving back, inspired by the wave of positivity that had swept through his establishment. For Sarah, the most rewarding aspect of everything was seeing how kindness had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond what she could have imagined. Families struggling financially received unexpected gifts of groceries or utility bill payments. Neighbors helped each other with home repairs or childcare without expecting anything in return. Even strangers struck up conversations in line at the grocery store, offering words of encouragement or sharing smiles. The world outside wasn't perfect. It still carried its share of hardships and challenges. But within the walls of the diner, and increasingly beyond them, people were choosing to come together rather than drift apart. One evening, as Sarah closed up the diner after a particularly busy day, she paused to look around the empty space. The chairs were stacked neatly on the tables, the floors gleamed from being freshly mopped, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. It was peaceful, almost magical, in its simplicity. As she stood there, she thought about how far they'd all come. The widow who had walked in feeling defeated, the soldiers who had turned gratitude into action, and the countless others who had joined the movement in their own ways. Sarah smiled softly to herself. None of this had been planned, none of it had been expected, but somehow it had happened. And now, it belonged to everyone. Proof that even in a world often clouded by uncertainty, there is still light to be found. All it takes is one person to shine it. With a final glance at the diner, Sarah turned off the lights and locked the door behind her. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly against the night sky, casting a gentle glow over the parking lot. Somewhere out there, someone else was beginning their own act of kindness, unaware of the chain reaction they might set in motion. And somewhere else, another person was receiving that kindness, carrying it forward in ways big and small, because that's how it works. Kindness isn't just an action, it's a cycle, a gift that keeps giving long after the initial gesture is made. And as Sarah walked to her car, she knew one thing for certain. The diner wasn't just a place anymore. It was a reminder, a living, breathing testament to the fact that goodness exists and it thrives when we choose to nurture it. And so, the story continued, not just in the diner, but in every corner of the world where people dared to believe in the power of kindness. Because sometimes all it takes is $20, a plate of eggs, and a willingness to care, to remind us that the best parts of humanity are worth celebrating, protecting, and passing on.